So, a very warm welcome to our series of Life in Leadership, a podcast from Windsor Leadership. I'm Liz Ward, Alumni Relations Manager, and over the coming months, I'll be joined by Dave Lewis, former Deputy Chief Constable for Dorset, Non-Executive Director of the Cricket Regulator, and Non-Executive Director of the Human Tissue Authority. Dave is also a Windsor Leadership Programme Chair and Facilitator, and together we'll be in conversation with a series of high-profile leaders to explore their leadership insights. So we are delighted today to be joined by Sophie Turner Laing OBE, Chair of the National Film and Television School. So first of all, can you give us a quick start of a 10, a 1-minute flavour of your background for those who may not know you?
Well, I probably had a kind of slightly unusual route through into media because I didn't go to university. So I literally did a secretarial course, ended up working for the Variety Club of Great Britain, went to Australia, came back and started working for the Muppets. And I've been in the media for 40 years and loved every minute of it.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. Dave, over to you.
Fabulous. Thanks, Liz. Sophie, it's a wonderfully varied, certainly beginning to your career at the PR in Australia, the working in secretarial roles, then working with Jim Henson out of his house in Hampstead, I understand. Can you talk about how important leadership figures around you were in shaping your outlook and your perspective and the success you then achieved?
I think the people you work with are super important. What you possibly don't realize at the time, and I'm certainly guilty of that, was the impact that they do have on you. And it's only when you're probably looking back at your career and thinking, where did the years go, that you suddenly realize that some of the way that you operate is kind of learned from who you were working with. I'm an enormous fan of people being in the office because I think that's how you see both good and bad leadership and being able to absorb it. Jim was the most amazing character, fairly amusing, having a frog basically for your boss. And he literally was Kermit the Frog. So when he rang you, he sounded exactly the same. He, as you probably are just about old enough to remember the Muppet Show, it was a collection of characters. And Jim was very much a collector of people. He had very little ego, but he managed to get the best out of people. And watching them at work and in the studios where they made the puppets or whatever it is, it was a really fascinating insight. And probably the most fun and happiest of my working life was there. My oldest friends are still my oldest friends from having worked there.
That's fantastic. And I heard you talking in the Woman's Hour interview about making your own luck and taking risks. And having worked your way up to the top of a number of organisations in a difficult sector, I wonder what advice you'd give to youngsters starting out about that.
Well, I think in the media industry, it's very egalitarian because everybody starts off at the bottom. So it really does not matter if you've got a first from Oxford, you're still going to start off at the bottom. And therefore, there's a very collegiate spirit. Also, making TV is a very collaborative process. It's not really one person. It's like running a relay race where everybody hands the baton on to the next person so that you get the show made. And I think making your luck is actually about being brave and not worrying that you don't know how to do something 100%. I think it's kind of interesting because I do a lot of mentoring still, and working with young people at the start of their career is for me is really about encouraging them to be brave and to take that step forward. Because as I point out to everybody, if you're in media, you're not in the brain surgery business. Nobody is going to die if you get anything wrong. You will look maybe a bit foolish and it may be a bit embarrassing, but it's not life-changing. And I think there is, certainly with the young that I work with at the moment, there is this kind of inference that everything has to be perfect. Whereas you know, we were all very lucky in a way. We didn't have social media. I mean, I started work as a secretary with a telex, not even a fax. We didn't have computers even and stuff like that. So you kind of just had to get on with it. Yeah. And there was no double checking, and there was also no measuring. So when I was at Henson's and selling their shows around the world, you know, Jim was way more interested if you'd sold it to, I don't know, somewhere in Africa or Bahamas or something like that. He was interested in getting the message out about having fun and this kind of group atmosphere and inspiration and energy, which was just fantastic, actually.
And how has that influenced your leadership style, do you think?
I kind of, I guess, moved in my career, even within one organisation like the BBC. I was very lucky to have Greg Dyke as the Director General there, who was a really can-do, no-nonsense kind of guy. And I was in this kind of very weird bit of the BBC, which was basically buying all the programmes and films and documentaries that the BBC didn't make. So we were slightly looked down on as being the kind of not really the BBC in a quite an Oxbridge world. But yes, I'd known Greg from before. And when they were short of or needing to interview for a new head of legal affairs, I said to him, well, why don't I do it for a temporary period while you find out who you'd like? Mainly because I'd been a negotiator all my life, so I knew my way around contracts, but I definitely wasn't a lawyer by any stretch of the imagination. But I think in a way that gave me insight about how you run things and not overcomplicate things. And that started my kind of role at the BBC, where I was known as the super temp, because I stood in for different directors of different divisions. So I did illegal, marketing and television, which was all great fun. And that was because I volunteered to do the first one. Yeah. Which I could have absolutely ballsed up, but it was okay in the end.
How fascinating. So if you'd literally not put your hand up and said, I'll give that a go, perhaps things would have turned out very differently.
I think in your working life, less so I think now, because I think there's much more opportunities for the young to move from company to company. And the world of AI and digital is creating all sorts of opportunities that we would never ever had, kind of thing. But if you weren't careful, you get quite locked in to one bit of your career, and that's how you'd stay. And actually, I think I'm kind of more curious and a bit nosy, and so I was quite interested about what other people were doing.
That's really interesting, actually. And you've touched on AI there. I'd love to sort of have a little chat around that and its influence in the industry that you're in. Looking ahead, what do you see as the major challenges for leaders over the next 10 years? And how do you think AI is going to impact on the entertainment and media sector going forwards?
Well, that is the multi-million-dollar question, isn't it? I think if I look back and I was, I don't know, 15 years younger and had another 10 years or so to go on my career, I think one of the things, and I was fortunate at being at Sky, because Sky was like half content and half technology. So you had to get your heads around that, even if you were known as being one of the lovies. So because they were always, even way back then, very good at working out what people were watching, what they would like, and things like that. And that in the early days of algorithms, I guess, more than anything else. I think AI for the entertainment industry is an enormous subject at the moment that people trying to get their heads around. But I think any leader today, their biggest challenge is how do you stay in step or ahead of technology? It doesn't matter what industry you're in, because it's moving so fast. And unless you come up through the kind of, I don't know, coder or engineer route, it's very hard. And I don't think all industries should be run by engineers. I recently went to travel around some vineyards in California, and all the winemakers there now have biology, science, and physics degrees. It's not about farming grapes. It's the technology and the chemistry. And that I thought was such an interesting look at something that you assume is a very traditional, will never change over time. But all the younger generation of winemakers coming through are all scientists.
Fascinating. It is really interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, so I thought for me, an obvious question coming out of the back of all of that is I can remember as a child having just a choice of 3 TV channels. And now we live in an age of media content being produced by, the streaming giants at one end and anyone with a mobile phone at the other end. And I wondered how you thought that changes leadership, I suppose within the sector in which you operate, but actually also more generally.
Well, I think in media, you are still really, really focused on finding the best idea. So that, could be AI created, maybe not. But at the end of the day, it doesn't change leadership. I think at the end of the day, being in our industry, in the media industry, is a lot about taste. It's whether you can spot or feel a great story, a great storyteller, somebody who lights up the screen with imagination. I recently had the real joy last year of giving the National Film and TV School Fellowship to Jack Thorne, who obviously his drama series Adolescence has been probably the most talked about a drama has been for a very, very long time. And I think, I don't think it changes your leadership, because ultimately at the end of the day, I'm not on the floor shooting a film or making a TV series, technically the suit. But it's my job to enable creativity. So it's like putting together the best kind of party you could ever imagine, where you can take this director and this writer, or somebody comes into you and pitches this wonderful idea that you have no idea how you're going to able to afford it or do it or whatever, but that's your job, is to connect all those pieces. I'm an avid jigsaw puzzler, and I do think that probably helps in the way that I look on teams and leadership.
I love that, Sophie. And you've referenced there sort of almost having a recipe and mixing things in. And I noticed as part of your career, when you were CEO of Endemol Shine Group, you headed up the global content producer and distributor that brought us Big Brother and Peaky Blinders. And obviously managing director at Sky, you were instrumental in leading the expansion of the portfolio of entertainment channels. So what challenges did you experience? And if you had your time again, perhaps we can focus on this one. What would you do differently? You've touched on a bit already, but what would you do differently if you had your time again?
Sky was a kind of interesting challenge, because it was incredibly well known for sport and news and not really known for its other content. So my then CEO was James Murdoch, who was very technology orientated, super smart. And I had to convince him that it was going to be worth his while investing in UK content, because we would always be seen as just a carrier of somebody else's programs if we didn't have our own. But the thing is, we tried various different things, and obviously it wasn't working if you did it very cheaply. You have to put sizable investment in to make it stand up to the best that was on offer on terrestrial TV, because Amazon and Netflix really hadn't started way back then. And then the CEO who followed him was a fellow called Jeremy Darroch, who was brilliant to work for. And I amazingly managed to convince him, really on the back of a fag packet, that we should launch Sky Atlantic, because it gave us, so that was very much my baby, of which I'm very proud, but it gave us a home to put not only marvelous shows from HBO and everything around the world, but also our own kind of really seminal showcase type of dramas and things like that. So that was great. Would I have done anything differently? No, not really, because it's power of persuasion usually at the end of the day, and as an old negotiator and a seller, the thing is, when you're in a company, you spend as much time selling internally as you do externally. And the thing is never to lose that skill, because the different tactics you have to take when you know something in your gut is right, although you've got no empirical proof, which is kind of slightly odd in the tech world, is kind of interesting. Endemol Shine was a kind of much bigger jigsaw puzzle to play with because I'd never been CEO before. I had to merge two pretty large companies. So there were 4,500 people in 30 countries. And Endemol was very Dutch and very male, and Shine was kind of global but quite female in its way of operating. And it was a fascinating challenge. And the hardest work I've ever done was trying to persuade people, yes, they could work together and that one wasn't better than the other. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, they were just brilliant at making shows. And you had to convince them that was their unifying USP. If I could have done anything differently, because Endemol Shine was half owned by Fox and half owned by Apollo private equity. And I had been shielded at Sky because Sky made a lot of money. And I never, ever had to think of networking capital, which if I'd known how prominent it is in private equities lingo, I would probably have spent 6 months learning how to do that. You catch on quite quickly and you hopefully have a good CFO, but it was the challenge of taking Fox, very long-term investor in content and media in all sorts across the world, and Apollo, who you knew was going to sell the business in 3 to 5 years. So they were only interested in the short term. And so balancing the different viewpoints from each shareholder was challenging, but we did it.
And also, I would imagine culturally, you've got two very different cultures that you're trying to combine. Would that be true?
Yes, in a way, although you would probably understand that working for the Murdochs was fairly direct and vibrant and fast-paced moving. So not much different to working for private equity. But the thing is, Fox had a genuine love and knowledge of content, which takes time. Drama takes time to get developed, get written and get made.
And I'm really interested in that tension between the Fox and the private equity relationships and how, as the leader, especially as a new leader and new in the role, you told the story. We've talked about storytelling. I think it's an important part of leadership. How you told the story and knitted those two different constituencies together successfully.
Well, neither of them really chaired the meeting, so they let me kind of get on with it. So that was helpful. I had a really great senior leadership team, and we basically kept the shareholders away from the content makers.
Right.
Because it wasn't their job. You know, if you're in charge of Would I Lie to You or program like that, it wasn't your job to work out what the debt level was and whether we were going to break our covenants or the next stage in developing and things like that, because you needed them super focus on what they were really brilliant at. So in a way, there was obviously a wider leadership team, because I used to have a call once a month on Zoom. I think we were like the first people to ever do this, where at 7 a.m. in the morning, I spoke at one time to all 30 countries. So it was like 2 o'clock in the morning for the Brazilians, who were brilliant and stayed up all night. But it was more a way of making people feel part of one group. And although you couldn't have a discussion about anything, you could get people to present about what they were working on, or what the challenges were, or what the wins were, or what we'd ballsed up, or whatever it may be, so that people genuinely felt part of a family, even though we were spread all over the place.
One of the things that you've referenced as well is that enabling function. You know, you as the suit, your job is to enable people. I wonder where you found the confidence to do that, Sophie, because quite often we hear on programs, you know, it's a running theme, that imposter syndrome. People find themselves in roles and they think, well, am I able to do this? How did you overcome that or manage that?
Oh, I think we all suffer from that terribly.
Mm.
I used to occasionally go and sob in the loo. It more out of frustration because yeah, it's kind of behemoth to move in one direction. It was like trying to pull teeth at some stages, kind of thing, because everybody was convinced the way they used to do it was the right way.
Yeah.
And but I think it's the power of persuasion again that I mentioned earlier, is that you have to be articulate about what you feel the North Star is, about where you're trying to head for. You admit to everybody that it's not going to be a straight route and you don't have all the ideas. You're expecting them to contribute and it will zigzag a bit, and not to worry about that. Again, it's that thing of it's not perfect, but also it's all about opportunities and seeing an opportunity and being able to grab it and move quickly with it.
Lovely.
Yeah,
I love
brilliant.
your approach to life. Dave, you've got another question.
Yeah. So I'm wondering, you've got a fabulous career achievements. I was going to say behind you, but that's not at all how I mean it. But you've got so much that you've done, and I'm wondering now, as chair of the National Film and Television School, what difference you're hoping to make within the sector, and generally, is there still something left to achieve, and what is it?
Oh, that's such an interesting question. I think, well, I'm also the vice chair at Somerset House. So
Yes.
I have two relatively big pro bono roles. I made the decision when we sold Endemol Shine to Banijay in 2020 that I would never do another corporate role. I just didn't want to be, I'd literally been on a plane for 6 years solid. I had to commute every Sunday to Amsterdam. And I honestly felt, and then COVID hit, that I probably had PTSD because you are just kind of running the whole time. And I wanted to breathe a bit. And then I suddenly realized that actually I was fortunate enough to choose what I liked to go into. I'd been on the board of the film school years ago when I was at Sky, so I knew it pretty well. And the last chair had asked me to mentor the director of the school. So I stayed pretty much in contact with what was going on. And I absolutely love it. And for me, there is something I'm about very energized by people. I couldn't imagine doing a job pro bono or paid that wasn't about people. And
Yeah.
this is trying to help that next generation of storytellers get their foot on the ladder and produce amazing films, documentaries, games, whatever it may be. And that for me is a very much I somebody gave me the phrase, and I can't remember who I'm selling it from, but when you put your hand down to the next generation below you and you pull them up with you. And that for me is a visual image that I feel very strongly about. So the thing that we hopefully are doing at the school is that we're buying a new building so we can expand, but I was very adamant that we couldn't be the national school and just in leafy Beaconsfield.
Yeah.
So we opened in Scotland last year, supported by the Sean Connery Foundation. So we're now into year 2 of having filmmakers in Scotland, which is fantastic. So there's lots to do. And AI is the biggest debate that we have at the moment, because we've got to work out how we teach
Yeah.
them to use it.
Yeah. Yeah. You see so much AI content, don't you, as well? And I'm impressed by your sense of, I like that image of, reaching down and pulling people up with you, and you're really committed to coaching and mentoring. Can you talk to us a little bit about that and why you see that as important?
I feel I have the time, and I felt very lucky in maybe a little bit of DNA, a lot of luck, and some help from people I either work with or work for in getting my career going up. And I feel if you can give that person you're mentoring that kind of resolute, kind of slight body armor that they'll be fine and they can do it, and just encouraging them, because everybody's so busy that nobody has time to listen to anybody. And I think the one thing you do, let's say mentoring, although I trained to be a coach at the BBC. I haven't done that for a while, but I stick with mentoring. And it's really getting people to solve their own problems and to be brave about going outside their comfort zone, because that's how they get on. Nobody's telepathic. They're not going to be able to sit there and see that you really would like to do this other job unless you tell them.
Yes.
I think ultimately, as a leader, you want to enable people to believe in themselves, because if they can do that, they'll come up with great ideas. Some will be terrible, but a lot will be great. And you're always conscious of wanting to move the next generations on, because there's nothing worse in any organization if you get stuck and there's that layer that just isn't moving. I feel as a CEO, you have to do is work out, how do you let the air in so that people feel not frustrated because their bosses may be doing a great job, but at some stage it's going to have to be time for a change if you're going to keep the young. And that is a very difficult balancing act.
Fascinating. Sophie,
Very good.
we're so grateful to you. Thank you so much for your time. And yeah, we look forward to hearing what next in your world and in the world of film and television.
Yes, keep watching.
Will do. Brilliant. Thank you, Sophie. Really enjoyed
Thank you.
that.